Yalimidad and welcome everyone. My name is Sabah Dosani and I will be moderating today's Field of the Future speaker series exploring early childhood education. A little bit about me, I am currently a student at Texas A&M University studying to hopefully become a nurse. I am also the College Station representative for AKEB. The Fields of the Future Speaker Series is hosted by Aga Khan Education Board with the aim of exploring career paths, innovation, and opportunities in selected fields of the future. As for today's edition, we will begin by reflecting on knowledge society and the purpose of education in Islam. At this time, I would like to invite Sunitha Ali, our Fields of the Future team member, to share this reflection.
Yalimdad, everyone. Welcome to our 8th episode of Fields of the Future Speaker Series 2. My name is Sunita Ali, and I am the Fields of the Future member, serving on Aga Khan Education Board for the United States. Fields of the Future stems out of guidance from Maulana Hazri Imam that, and I quote, "The most important thing we can learn or teach at any school in a world of perpetual change is the ability to go on learning. None of us have all the answers. Quite often, we don't even know what questions to ask, nor can we discern the road ahead by looking in a rearview mirror. Past lessons must constantly be renewed and reapplied as we adapt to new technologies and new expectations. You are all here because you've decided to invest in yourself, in your family, in our community, in our world. And as we think about where such investment is most valuable, science shows us that the greatest investment is in our youth. In his speech made in Kenya in 2007, Maulana Hazri Imam says, "The evidence accumulates steadily, showing that an investment made in the earliest preschool years can bring enormous dividends as a child proceeds from one level of education to another. These benefits are tangible and intangible. Part of a reason why this is a field of the future is because many of these benefits are still being discovered. Our speaker, Saima, will tell us a bit about what we know and what we might learn. Before I hand it off to Sabah to introduce our speaker for this afternoon, I would like to thank the team and partners for all their hard work in organizing these events. You can register for our final session of the season at www.fieldsofthefuture.com.
Thank you, Sunitha. Now that we have an introductory understanding of some of the relevant concepts, let's meet our speaker for today. Ms. Saima Gowani is an early childhood professional with over 15 years of experience working in academic, nonprofit, and volunteer settings, both in the United States and globally. While her passion is in conducting research that can be used to influence family and child policy, she has worked and led a variety of different projects focused on advancing the needs of children and families, including working in early childhood classrooms, designing and implementing early childhood curriculum, and training teachers and administrators. Most recently, she served as the project director for the Illinois Birth to Three Monitoring Project, where she led a team of data collectors and researchers to evaluate the quality of state-funded home visiting programs. Saima has also been an active volunteer for the Aga Khan Education Board's early childhood endeavors in the USA. Presently, she is completing her doctorate in education policy from Teachers College, Columbia University. Saima also holds a master's degree in international education policy from Harvard University and a bachelor's in economics from the University of California, Berkeley. Saima loves to travel, and when the pandemic is over, she hopes to continue to travel and aspires to be a travel writer. Before we begin, I would like to encourage our audience to ask questions throughout the session. You can do that by using the Q&A feature of Zoom and entering your question there. The upvote feature is enabled, so if you have the same question as someone else, please like it and it will rise to the top of the Q&A box. Our team will be noting the questions to be asked during the Q&A session towards the end. The recording of this session, along with the presentation, will be shared on our website, fieldsofthefuture.com. And now, without further ado, our speaker, Saima Gowani, will speak to us about her career path, new opportunities within her field, and how this field will evolve in the future. With that, I would like to hand it off to Saima Gowani.
Yalimath, everybody. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. My name is Saima, as you just heard. And thank you so much for coming. I know it's Father's Day. I know you guys probably have other commitments to your time. And what's more exciting than listening to a speech on early childhood development on such a wonderful Sunday? So thank you so much for coming and welcome, everyone. From the poll that you guys had done earlier, we were able to get some feedback about who you were, but I wanted to understand a little bit more about what you know about early childhood. And so I'm asking if you can go to this website, menti.com, and enter in this code 9502-455-4540 and respond to this question. What do you think when you hear early childhood development? And as you type in your answers will come here. And we'll be able to hear a little bit of feedback from you about what you know about early childhood. What do you think about when you think about early childhood? Great, we're starting to get some responses onto our screen. Montessori, holistic development, caring, education, growth, toys, lots of great answers there. Intentionality, that's lovely, that's a great word. Neurological connections, yes, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that today as well. Empathy. MJ, somebody will have to explain to me what MJ means. Emotions, for sure. Intentional play. These are all really, really wonderful, wonderful words and wonderful feedback. I can tell from the audience that you guys have definitely heard about early childhood, maybe know a little bit about it or have studied it or teach in the field, which is great to hear. And I'll give everybody just a couple more seconds. Social connections and emotional IQ. Caring, patience, intentionality. Yep, those are all wonderful. And so let's talk a little bit about what I will talk about today. Hopefully in the next 30 minutes or so, I want to cover a few things about early childhood. We'll talk about some of the salient features about early childhood and why more recently there's been such a push in the Jamaat to understand more about it and do more programming around early childhood. I'll talk briefly about my journey and how I got started in this area, and moving on to how you can actually get started in the area if you're interested, and what degrees and courses are required for ECD. And then we'll spend some time talking about careers and a future in ECD and what your career options could look like. And then lastly, we'll open it up to questions from you for the audience. So please note down your questions or send them through the chat box and stick around. So your answers were wonderful and lovely. When I think about early childhood, I think about, to me, the story of early childhood is a story of possibilities. Does anyone know what this building is? If you do, please put your answers in the chat box. We'll look to see if anybody has answers here. I don't think anybody here is from the Bay Area. I grew up in the Bay Area, so the Bay Area is still a place that I'm very much in love with, and I go back and visit my family there all the time. And this story from the Bay Area is really, really fascinating to me. This building is called the Millennium Towers in San Francisco. So what's the story here? In 2002, when this building was being designed and thought through, it was being envisioned to be the 4th tallest building in San Francisco with an estimated budget of $350 million. It has 419 residential units. Some of the folks that ended up buying apartments here were people like Joe Montana and Kevin Durant. And in 2009, 2010, when the building had opened, the building received multiple awards for architecture from multiple different associations as well as magazines. The penthouse of this building sold for $13 million. But shortly after the homeowners occupied these beautiful homes, they faced some adversity and challenges because the structure of the building was not great. The foundation was not great. In 2015, it was discovered that the building was actually sinking into the ground. And then the building also started leaning over a little bit. And as more research and discovery was happening, they found out that the foundation of the building was actually not very well grounded in San Francisco. And given San Francisco and the conditions there in terms of earthquakes and just the environment, the building ended up actually having to be evacuated in 2016. But what does that, in terms of its foundations, have to do with ECD? So the key lesson really for me is very straightforward. It's that those foundations matter. And that's really the story of early childhood education. What makes ECD so important is the fact that it sets the foundation for all of our development later on in our lives. When a baby is born, the brain contains as many as 100 billion neurons. That's almost as many stars as there are in the entire galaxy. And as the brain experiences new experiences, whether they be positive or negative, these connections in the brain that you can see on your screen, they continue to strengthen. So for example, when a baby is born, each neuron in the brain, each of these like big connectors in the brain, has about 2,500 connections. But as a child gets older, by the time they're 2 or 3 years old, each of those neurons might have as many as 15,000 connections. And these connections continue to grow and strengthen over the earliest days of our lives. But the speed at which that they grow slows down as we get older. So the more of these connections that are used, the more that they strengthen, the less of these connections that are used, the brain will eliminate them over time. And hence, at the heart of early childhood really lies this desire to have a very strong foundation for the brain, as well as for overall development, so that these positive connections that we have in our brain are strengthened, the negative connections are weakened or eliminated over time. And together, we work towards building a better brain. But didn't we know this already? And for anybody who might be familiar with the study, to a certain extent, we might have known this, but now we actually have the neurological research to show it. So on the left in this image is a picture of a healthy developing brain. On the right is actually a picture of a brain that has been severely damaged through neglect. It's a picture of a child's brain from living in an orphanage in Romania. So in the 90s, when these images were finally available and this research was being done, we finally had a physical image of what the effect was on a child's brain going through severe abuse and neglect at these early stages. Maybe not abuse, I'm sorry, but definitely neglect. So effectively, like when neurologists were looking at these pictures, they would say that this child's brain has really suffered massive brain damage. So even though these children lived in orphanages, they had adequate physical care. It was the neglect or the social and emotional connections that the brain was trying to make at that time, that it needed to make at that time, that were missing. And that really caused the brains to develop differently than those of normal children. Their brains were measurably smaller, and they actually contained black holes, if you can see in the image, where the development had completely stopped. And these are the areas that tend to govern our social and emotional development, leaving these children affected for the rest of their lives. And so, and sadly, like when we look at these images, like the younger that the child was, the more lasting the impact was of the brain. And what we know from the latest research in neurology is that the foundations of our brain, that as these new foundations of our brain get set, based on our experiences, based on the genes that we have, it becomes increasingly harder to affect that foundation. This is not to say that it's impossible, but as you can see from the picture above, the effort, the time, and the cost to make these changes over time becomes increasingly harder. One of the best services that we have, at least in the United States, around early childhood development is this notion of early intervention. Parents are encouraged to assess their children's development every time you go to the pediatrician. The pediatrician will do an assessment for you from your well-child visits that kind of looks at your physical development, social development, language development on a regular basis. The recommendation in the first year of a child's life is to visit the pediatrician 7 times. As an adult, when was the last time we went to the doctor for a well-child visit? Maybe a year. But as these young children are growing, because we know that they're changing so quickly, the recommendations are such that you follow them much more closely at that age. And it's precisely at these earliest ages that we can detect some of these issues when children are young, and we can engage them in activities or supports so that some of these issues that we talked about earlier might be mitigated as they get older. And hence, when I think about young children, I really think about the possibilities. I think about all the amazing things that we could do for the child, all the amazing opportunities that lie ahead for them. So the question, of course, comes like, so how do you build these amazing opportunities? How do you build this better brain? And the answer is always to have very good early childhood development around you, which is a combination of all of the things that a child needs at these youngest ages. So in terms of health, physical as well as mental health, and especially in the last year, we've heard a lot around mental health, but this is not just a phenomenon that affects older people or teenagers. It's something that very, very young children can feel as well, as was demonstrated in the photos from that Romanian village or the Romanian orphanage. Children need all of their immunizations, well-child visits, lots of fresh air and outdoor play, and definitely lots of sleep in these earliest ages. Because it's during that sleep that the brain is actually strengthening those neural connections and making new neural connections so that they can grow and function. Nutrition, of course, I mean, that is something that's so common, breast milk or formula at the earliest ages, as well as healthy foods and other nutrients as the children get older. Responsive caregiving, and this is perhaps at the heart of early childhood development. Loving, caring, secure relationships that make us feel safe, and that give children a protective barrier almost. So it builds a child's social emotional skills for them to have the ability to play with their friends, to negotiate relationships, to learn the difference between right and wrong. It's really these secure, caring relationships that will protect the child from any negative influences that they may have in their life. Learning and stimulation, of course, in terms of developing their cognitive abilities, their language skills, their ability to reason or develop higher order cognitive thinking skills, or do crazy math manipulations, or make robots or all sorts of things with Legos. And a lot of this information that I just shared with you is very instinctual. And we've been doing this for generations. This is what's called good parenting. And parents often ask me, like, they didn't know this necessarily when they were younger. But to a certain extent, we did know this when we were younger. Every parent, wants to be able to protect their child from harm or be able to have a strong foundation for them. But hopefully some of the work in ECD that we've been doing as a Jamaat, as well as through programs like this, continues to serve as a reminder for all of the good things that a child needs to be able to set them up for a strong foundation in the future. Another question I get in ECD quite often is it better for a child to attend an ECD center at home, or is it better for them to go to a center? And the answer to that question is always that it depends. It is not universal that home care is better for the child than being in a center, or that center is better. There's a lot of parents that do really wonderful, amazing things in terms of giving the best support to their young children when they're home, to be able to develop these strong neural connections that we've talked about. If the home is a loving environment with parents and grandparents, extended family, that village that we talk about in terms of development, the child will absolutely have all of the opportunities to develop these connections. However, if there is neglect at home, if there is abuse at home, if there's trauma that the child is kind of going through at home, and the television sadly becomes like a constant babysitter for the child, and there's no interpersonal connections that are being made, or there's no stimulating environment, then of course, then it might be better for a child to be in a center, where a center might be able to provide some of those opportunities for the child to develop. And as I've been studying ECD for quite some time in my life, I've realized that these developmental domains, this holistic development, it's not really just the things that we need in the earliest years, really, right? Like these are the things that we need throughout our lives, perhaps in different percentages, perhaps we focus on some aspects of our lives differently as we get older, but a fully balanced life probably would include all of these items throughout our lives. And so why study ECD? Like, what is the impact of ECD on a society at large? And we bring this up into kind of 3 different areas of the impact. There's definitely the developmental imperative, which we talked about earlier, right? A lot of the research in terms of early childhood, in terms of the brain development, also suggests that children that have gone through strong early childhood programs, as well as have had strong early childhood connections at home, they are less likely to repeat a grade at school. They are less likely to have identified special needs, because some of those needs, when they were identified as a child, were being addressed, and the child was able to receive the supports at an earlier age. A lot of the kids that go to good early childhood programs or have strong early childhood development at home are prepared academically for grades later on in their futures. They're most likely to graduate from high school, and then all of that means that most likely they'll be able to join the workforce and be able to earn more money. There's, of course, the economic imperative as well, in terms of like joining the workforce, earning more money. There's some really great research that's been done by James Heckman, who's a Nobel laureate who works out of the University of Chicago, who's been applying a lot of his econometric skills in assessing the benefits of early childhood. And according to some of the work that he's done, he suggests that for every $1 that you invest in early childhood programs, there's a $7 return on your investment. No bank would be able to give you that kind of return. But knowing this is why we think it's really important for policymakers, for government officials, for program planners to think about making sure that there's early childhood programs for everyone, so that children are able to benefit from this development. And of course, there's the moral imperative, right? If we know all of this information, if we know that brain development is important, if we know that these social connections are important for a young child, why wouldn't we make sure that our kids are set up for the best things in the future? So of course, there's this moral development or moral imperative that kind of like pushes us to want to do well for our kids. And going forward, I mean, that's the story of ECD. I'm going to talk a little bit about the story of me and getting involved in ECD. So I started off my career with a professional degree in a degree in economics. So this was a job I had making financial software, and it was great. Like I was able to use my economic skills as well as some nascent computer software skills that I had to build software. But I knew that I was involved in lots of different volunteer opportunities, whether it was like Camp Mosaic, Education Board. And the more that I got involved in some of these programs, the more I realized that software was not really where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And with some soul searching, I was able to find a teaching position in Hunza. So I got this chance to go to the Aga Khan Academy in Hunza. And as they say, I didn't look back. I spent almost a year there in Hunza teaching English language to high school girls, as well as some computer basics to the community members. And while I was there, I couldn't help but think about just the school systems that were there to support these girls, to support these learners. And they were not effective enough to be able to meet the demand that was out there in terms of like how many people wanted to get a good, solid education and how much access there was to that education. So when I came back to the US, I started a master's program in education, looking at exactly that in global contexts. I learned that this was not just an issue in terms of access in Pakistan, but universally. And there were so many things that countries could do to strengthen and support their work. And that education, that degree, as well as my background, helped me get a job at the Aga Khan Foundation. So for a few years, I lived in Geneva working through AKEB. And while I was there, I was able to kind of like bring all of these different skills that I'd accumulated over time. So I had my software, my data background, along with the education knowledge from living in Hunza, and then the academic skills that I'd learned through my master's program. And data is a really big part of education. And I know there was a seminar a few weeks ago that talked about data and data visualization. There's another one around big data as well. And data is a huge part of education. And it was great for me to be able to kind of bring all of those skills together and be able to work in education using that data to help programs, to help countries make better educated decisions using data about what were some of these issues in education that mattered. And then while I was there with AKEF, there was lots of talk about early childhood. There's lots of talk, I'm sure, in the community as well as about early childhood and its importance. And when I was ready, I decided I wanted to pursue a doctorate in education with a specific focus in early childhood, which brings me here. So this is my journey so far. It's far from over, but I hope that it gives you a sense of like the trajectory. And if you are interested in starting in early childhood, these are some of the kinds of things you would learn. So if you were interested in pursuing a degree in ECD, some of the courses that you would take. So whether it be at the associate's level or the bachelor's level, the courses you would have would be around child development. You would understand lots more in a lot more detail than what I just explained on this webinar around cognitive development, around social emotional development, around the stages of development, how children learn language and develop language. You would definitely take courses in child development and human development and child psychology. Most likely, depending on the type of program that you would have a teaching practicum where you would actually be in an early childhood classroom, working with children and getting feedback from the teachers that are there. And again, depending on the program that you have, that you're a part of, you might also develop cognitive skills or learning skills around how to teach math or how to teach science or how to teach reading to young children as well. The career trajectory, the career ladder, if you were interested in this education path, is an amazing field. It's a very large growing field. Some of the statistics that I was able to pull up from the US Department of Labor suggested that there'd be approximately 116,000 new jobs opening up in the early childhood field in the next 5 years. That's a large demand for qualified workers, especially at these earliest levels. Fortunately or unfortunately, the barriers to entry are quite low. Like with the 2-year associate's degree or a CDA credential, which is a child development associate credential, you can enter the early childhood field and be able to have a job commensurate with your experience, working as an early childhood teacher's assistant, whether it be in a center or whether it be in a private school or a public school as well, where there might be early childhood programs. But this is a great way, like that, the associates or a CDA is a great way for folks who want to try to get their feet wet in education to try something out and enter the field and see what it's like to be in the classroom and if this is something that they want to do. And then of course, the more education, the more coursework, the more degrees that you get, there's lots of different opportunities. I mean, you could move into ECD you can become a classroom teacher, run your own classroom, whether it be like an infant classroom or a toddler classroom or preschool classroom, lots of different ages that we work with at the early childhood level. Early childhood is anywhere between birth and 8 years. So depending on where you personally want to be, of course, again, with more experience as well as a credential in state or school leadership or a center director credential, you could become a center director for ECD. There's lots of great opportunity. Lots of school districts are offering programs for kindergarten as well as primary school teachers that look for degrees in early childhood or early childhood with special education. That could be another career move that you could make. And then of course, if you continued in the early childhood field and decided to pursue master's degrees or a PhD, you could become a professor of ECD at the college level or at the university level as well, and run your own classrooms there. And, you know, early childhood to a certain extent, as I've talked a little bit about, is a very interdisciplinary type field. Like, so there's lots you can do in early childhood, and, you know, really like the image of that world, like the world is really in your hands. And so I talked a little bit about some of the things that you could do with just in the teaching track in terms of ECD, going from a teacher assistant. And of course, these are kind of laid out with the years of experience as well as the education that you have. You could go anywhere from being an assistant teacher, primary school teacher in a school district. You could work at the district level in terms of being a trainer or a coach, work in curriculum development, or move into district administration with master's degrees, become an adjunct teacher or even a professor at the college level. However, if you decided to take a slightly different path, maybe around the social work type route, again, with a focus or a basic degree in early childhood, you could move into the social work arena as well, with some work as a home visitor or a family support worker. Home visitor is kind of like what the old ECD program, the PR program used to be, where somebody would come to your home and talk to you about early childhood when your children were young. You could use that degree in early childhood to work as an activities director or summer camp director, or summer camp counselor as well, special education teacher, or with a PhD, you can definitely move into child psychologist or school psychologist as well. The route that I ended up taking for myself was here from early childhood. I worked at the program level doing work at foundations to think about early childhood programs and where the money was being spent and how it was being spent and where we should be kind of like focusing our intentions in terms of creating programs in early childhood. You could use some of your data skills and look at the data around early childhood or the programming, or even around the finance and how the money is being spent in education and early childhood. Or you could pursue the course around being a researcher in early childhood. So, if you decided to take a medical route, or if you have a background in medicine or nursing and were interested in ECD, you could, of course, be here as well. You could do work as a midwife or a doula, helping moms before they're delivering their baby. Think about some of the effects of brain development as well as child development on what the mom is going through as well as what the child is going through. You could work at the hospital level as a child life specialist. And hopefully nobody will have to kind of see a child life specialist, but these are really the folks that are at hospitals when children have illnesses at the hospital, and there's somebody who comes in and checks in with the child to make sure a lot of their social and emotional needs are taken care of, while the doctors and the nurses are taking care of the medical and physical needs that the child might be going through. You could also take a background in early childhood as well as your nursing credential and work as a pediatric nurse. If you have a business background or a background in law, this is also, again, like early childhood being very interdisciplinary. You could use that information or use that knowledge to work at the political level. You could work as a policy staffer or a lobbyist, like working with our government institutions to talk about the importance of early childhood. There's many folks that own ECD centers. You could become a center owner or a franchisee. If somebody is interested in that, they should look up a report that the New America Foundation has done around childcare deserts and how much need there is for high quality early childhood programs, because there's so many different places around the United States where there's gaps, that there's a lot of children available, but there's no centers for them to go to. You could also use a background in education or early childhood in particular to understand about how people learn and use that to become a corporate trainer for corporate institutions as well. And there's also lots of opportunity for creativity within the field. So I know folks that have used their degrees in early childhood. They have become museum curators. They design programs or activities for children to use when they're in museums, so that that becomes a learning experience for them. There's folks that can write blogs around the importance of early childhood or be able to translate some of the knowledge and research that is coming out of early childhood so that parents can understand it. Storybooks, like you can become a storybook writer as well to understand how children learn, what children need, and then be able to articulate that in a way that might be fun or interesting for a child. And especially, there's such a need for diverse learning, diverse children's books. There's only so many, and way more now than they used to be when we were growing up. But I mean, the interest my own children have, I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, when we're reading just a regular, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, which is an amazing book, and they get really interested in it. But then they read, Hot Roti for Dadaji, and they get so much more excited because it has the word roti in it, it has Dadaji in it, and we have roti and Dadaji in my house, and they just get so much more excited to want to pick up that book and read. And so again, another place where you could use some of your early childhood skills. You could work in measurement and development and look at curriculum development or creating standardized tests with that background. Become a children's toy maker. There's lots of parents that have entered this field as well, because they watch how their children learn and what they're doing and what they're playing with, and come up with new and brilliant toys for children to play with. And something else that I know that one of our speakers in the earlier months has talked about, Danish Grani, he had done some work in the 30 million word gap. So he's using his architectural skills to make playgrounds and classrooms that are early childhood friendly, which is, again, a really amazing creative field to be in. So you have your early childhood knowledge, you know how children learn, you know how children think, you know what they need in terms of their development, and then you're able to apply that to a different place or different field. So lots of really, really wonderful opportunities and really amazing things you could do with this kind of an interdisciplinary degree. And if you're interested in learning more about the field, I mean, of course, you could pursue a bachelor's or a master's in ECD, or you could look at it from a psychology perspective. You could look at human development, programs in nursing, schools of social work, or really any human services related field. If you're just interested kind of from the outside, you wanted to watch some videos from the Center of Developing Child, the link is here below. It's the Harvard Center for the Developing Child. Or courses you wanted to take through edX or Coursera that focus on ECD. There's a few different ones that are out there presently right now. As a parent, if you're interested in kind of learning more about ECD, the book that I really, really recommend that parents read is Scientist in the Crib by an amazing author named Alison Gopnik. You can also look her up. She's got some really great TED Talks out there about how children learn and how they develop. And then there's a more science-y book called From Neurons to Neighborhoods that talks about a lot of the brain research that I talked about earlier in this presentation. And some websites that have really great resources for both educators as well as parents, as well as folks that are interested in just the field themselves, like the 0 to 3 website is wonderful. And I mentioned the Harvard Center for the Developing Child. And so coming back to the story of possibilities. So this is, again, the Millennium Towers that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. So yes, the foundation was damaged. It wasn't built very strong. However, after 4 years of research and trying to understand what they could do with this really amazing building that they've put up, in 2020, a plan was put out to say, like, okay, this is what we could do in terms of like strengthening the foundation, strengthening the structure. If they had done it earlier, would it have been better? Sure. But again, like this is, you know, early childhood is again about possibilities. If you can strengthen the foundation. So the plan is for $100 million to fix the building. And hopefully in the future, when we talk about this particular building, we'll talk about how the foundations can be strengthened, as well as in children, as well as in buildings. So there is lots of hope, lots of possibilities, and lots of opportunities. And with that, I hope that we get a chance to work together. So let's work together, let's build better brains together. And especially as you get to be my age and older, our brain starts declining. So one of the best ways to be able to kind of build better brains is to work together and collaborate. I'm sure all of you will have wonderful ideas out there about how we could do different kinds of early childhood work together. And I would be really interested in hearing about it. So feel free to get in touch if you have questions about either the courses or the coursework or degrees or things you could do with your degree. And hopefully we can create some really, really great learning opportunities for the next generation. Thank you. I'm open to questions from all of you. That's all I got.
Thank you so much, Saima, for sharing your field of the future with us today. I genuinely enjoyed hearing about how widespread this field is with so many opportunities. With that, I will open the floor to questions. As I mentioned earlier, you may submit questions using the Q&A feature. So we did have some questions pop up during your presentation. Our first one here is for more leaning towards the parents, I guess. Is there anything that parents can do to help maximize their child's ability to learn?
Yeah, so I think at the early child level, like it's really about making sure that the foundations are strong, right? And those foundations really become strong through lots of play and lots of social emotional development. So lots of opportunities for children to kind of explore and learn and touch things and play with things and build with things and kind of see what the different, like, how do things work? How do things like behave? It's not really about like what they can make at the end. It's not about, you know, my baby can read or use flashcards. It's not really about that. It's much more about what they would be able to do in the future, right? So like a lot of the work in early childhood, and even my own experience, kind of talks about the interdisciplinary nature of early childhood, and saying I was able to use my software skills and bring them into education and become that much better and that much stronger. If children are only focused in one way, like if they're only really good at like one thing, like if they're really only good at math, then it becomes a lot harder for them to kind of think outside of the box as they get older. So instead, give them lots of different kinds of experiences so that as they get older, they'll be able to kind of apply those skills in different ways based on what they need in the future.
Yeah, I've always heard this term growing up doing Camp Mosaic, process over product. You learn
Yes.
more through the process than the end product. So I can see how that all connects. Thank you for that. You also talked about how important social connection is. Could you elaborate more on that? And at what age does it become a necessity for the child? Like they have to have the social connection.
So really it's from birth, right? It's, the time that the child comes out from the mother's womb, they hand the child back to the mom and say like, here, build your connection with your baby, right? And the baby has the strongest connections with the mom at that age, at that time, because they've smelled the mom for so many months being in the mom's stomach, right? And the skin to skin connection and making sure that the child feels safe. And so those social connections at the earliest ages are really about the child feeling safe and secure and feeling connected to the parent. And there's lots of different situations, there's lots of different types of families. It's not just about only the mom being able to do this. Like dads, I mean, especially today being Father's Day, like dads are such an important part of this equation, whether it be firsthand being with the child or being able to support the mom so that the mom can be with the child, but taking care of other things that the family might need. And in some equations, sometimes parents are not available or something has happened, and grandparents are there and aunts are there and uncles are there. And those social connections, really like the touching with the baby or the holding of the baby. Like there's some really wonderful work that's been done, especially at the earliest stages, about the importance of touch and how important it is to just hold the baby and touch them and let them hear your heartbeat. And, as I got older, as I've like some of the work that actually I'm doing right now in my PhD, I'm looking at the importance of touch for parents. And so it's not just about kids, it's also about, adults need that touch as well. And that's perhaps why COVID was so hard for so many people. Is like, you couldn't hug somebody, you couldn't like touch their hand and make sure that they were feeling okay. And so those social connections are like, really throughout their lives, right? And they're not fancy. Like people think like, oh yeah, we have to do all these amazing things to build the brain. But it's really, these things that we know innately we've been doing throughout our lives when we were young, right? Like touching somebody, taking care of them, connecting with them, socializing with them, having a talk with them, having a talk with your kids, or spending like alone time, just you and the kid, no phone, no screen, nobody else, and just, parent and child together.
I never realized like how broad, I guess, the term social connection was, because I only thought about that literal social aspect of it. But you went into touch and just spending time together, the smell and skin and everything. So that's very interesting to learn how it starts from the very second that they are born.
Yeah.
Thank you. More into the job aspect of this field, what school jobs specifically are compatible with the bachelor's degree in early childhood development?
Sure. So like you could be if you wanted to be in the classroom, being an early childhood teacher, either at the pre-K level, if your school district offers that, at the kindergarten level as well. Some of the primary grades will also take a degree in early childhood, up to grade 3 sometimes. You could become a classroom teacher. If you want to do something outside of the classroom, there's of course community support, there's family support, family coordinators that work with families to be able to connect them at the school level. There's child psychologists at the school level. Perhaps you might need a master's for that. But lots of different ways if you wanted to get connected through the school as well with a degree in ECD.
Thank you. There's just the interdisciplinary is just so crazy how this all connects.
Yeah.
Thank you. Another question for a career path. What advice do you have for someone with no background in education, but is very interested in opening and investing in an early childhood center in Canada?
Unfortunately, I don't know what the Canadian requirements are, but I think it would be probably similar in terms of like the legalities of opening up a center. Of course, the better your work in a center, like, I mean, you could run it as a business, right? Like you could run it as a I have a Subway, or I have an early childhood center, right? Like it's a business, right? You don't need to know about making sandwiches to be a good business person. But if you were in the early childhood field, it would really behoove you to have, like either taken some courses in ECD at the junior college level, watch some of these videos, take some of these courses online, learn more about ECD, so that when your teachers and your center directors and stuff are asking you questions or the direction you want to go in, you have the right answers to be able to say, like, yes, from a child development perspective, this is what's important for kids. So let's make decisions that would be for the betterment of the child, right? Like really keeping that child focus. It would be like wonderful, I think, like for anybody opening a business in ECD.
No, yeah, I definitely agree that if you are building a center like that, the core is the children's education. So the focus should be on that. I definitely agree. Furthermore, into the career paths, a lot of people are interested. So this is good. What are some starting steps for someone, again, who has no experience in education, but is interested in becoming a teacher?
Sure. So bachelor's degrees in early childhood, many different universities offer those. There's rankings, mostly like those rankings are really at the master's and the PhD level, but so many different institutes have schools of education that offer teaching credentials, that offer teaching experiences at the bachelor's level that give you the foundation in terms of like child development, in terms of cognitive development for young children, social emotional development for young children, and then also the teaching practicums, right? So that you're actually in a classroom getting feedback from another teacher to say like, this is going well, this is not going well, from like how you're doing it in the classroom. You can start in ECD very simply, like a 2 years associate's degree from a community college. As I mentioned, the barriers to entry are quite low to a certain extent. Like, with a 2-year degree, an associate's degree, you could be in the classroom, become a teacher assistant, and then work your way up from there. There's some scholarship opportunities. I can't say there's like a bazillion, but there are some. Like there's a Teach scholarship that's out there. There's lots of scholarships for families that have like a diverse background, right? So that's the way that the industry kind of says it. But to a certain extent, any of us from a South Asian background are considered diverse, because anybody who's not, middle class white would be considered diverse, right, in this field. And there's lots of scholarship opportunities at the community college level as well as at the state education level, if you were interested in going and trying to get a bachelor's degree in the field. And that would be, I think, the starting point, really, like either a CDA or an associate's, and then work your way up from there.
Would you say there are any online programs for this at all?
Yes.
So do you know of any?
So there are some, and I wrote down a name of a couple bachelor's programs from the online system. And if we can write the name of the person down, I can send that. I don't have them. I didn't open that link up. I know through Coursera, if you just wanted to get a touch or a feel for it, there's a course that Yale University offers, but it's just one course, right? This is just more of a foundational course. There's also a course from edX that talks about early childhood across the world and how like different people are kind of implementing early childhood programs globally. But again, these are just like foundational courses. But if you wanted to actually complete an online degree, like at the bachelor's level, I have 2 names. But look at your state colleges. Like all of your state colleges will have programs in education. Many of them, especially because of COVID, have gone online, which is a blessing in a disguise. And depending on the state that you're messaging from, I'm sure we can find programs that would be of interest to that Jamati member.
Thank you so much. There were a lot of people that were wondering that, so it would be very helpful.
Sure.
We have someone here that asked if there are any certain childhood approaches or methods that are more effective than others.
So this question comes up quite a bit, I think, when we talk about child development. And I think the methods that are the most appropriate are the methods that are the most holistic in nature. So I think any method that kind of suggests that you would leave out a type of development or really focus only on one type of development would be at the detriment of the child. So there's so many different approaches. There's Reggio Emilia, there's play-based, there's Montessori, which is very common in the Jamaat. And all of them are really great in different ways, depending on the child and depending on the need. And I know that if a parent is asking this question, trying to like think about an answer for what they should do for their own kid, I know the Education Board has some webinars and stuff that they've done that parents can use to help them determine early childhood centers for their children. But if you're looking at it from a cognitive perspective, like as a teacher, like which approach you should probably take, I think anything that would be holistic in nature would be something that would be beneficial to the child.
Awesome, thank you. And going on from that, how can you tell from, I guess, if you do want to build a center or if you're just having, sending your child to an early childhood center, how can you tell that you're getting the most out of it, that they're reaching their milestone, that it's a good choice?
Okay, so there's like, of course, as a parent, if you can see how your child and your teacher are working together in the classroom, that will be one of the best ways for you to be able to get a sense of, is that social connection happening, right? Is that happening between the teacher and the child? Is that happening between the children and the child? That would be one of the best things you could kind of like do, is kind of observe the teacher and the child playing together. And, unfortunately with COVID, sometimes that is not feasible, that is not possible. But, you talk to the teacher and ask her about like, what is it that you would do if my child was crying in the classroom, or if, what would you do to help, like, them in their, like, if they were having trouble, like having their lunch, or if they're missing home or whatever else. And I think some of those answers would become telling of how they're thinking about the social emotional connection for the child, and what they would do to respond to that.
And if you wanted to build a early childhood center of your own, what would you do to ensure that you're doing the best for these children?
Right. So I'm not a franchisee, I'm not a business owner, but if the business owner doesn't have that background in early childhood, hire somebody like a consultant to kind of talk about, these are the pedagogical approaches we want to use. Observe your teachers in the classroom to make sure that they're doing the things that need to be done. And every state has a list of requirements that kind of say, like, this is what the center will need. These are the kinds of resources that they need. These are the types of teachers you can hire. They should have this kind of a background. And so I think that's a starting point. And then of course, like observing your teachers and giving them feedback and giving them opportunities to like improve their own educational courses would be a good way to kind of ensure that the centers are going well.
Got it. Thank you so much. You're still very helpful, even though
I don't know if I'm, yeah.
We have someone here who does have a bachelor's in early childhood education, and they were wondering if early childhood education is helpful in pediatric speech therapy.
So of course, it's a start for sure, right? So if you wanted to be in the field of pediatric speech therapy, I'm sure there's certifications and coursework that need to be done. But understanding how language works, how language development works in young children, how their brain kind of accepts language, and what age they're ready for that kind of language development will all be important as you go into this field, right? So you'll probably need additional coursework in speech therapy from a medical perspective, which I don't know too much about. But any background in understanding how children learn, how children behave will be helpful as you're working with young children.
Yeah, it all ties back to the interdisciplinary.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like that degree really like allows you to kind of put the whole world at your fingertips, and you can do so many different kinds of things. Like it's a really great starting place. And then of course you want to build on it, right? Of course you want to try to work at the master's level or at the doctorate level if possible, to kind of extend your knowledge and your work and your reach.
Right, I agree. Thank you. We have a question here. Are there, I guess, any shortcuts for people to become a teacher at a Montessori? They have a high school degree, but they're a bit on the older side, but they are still very interested. So what do you recommend?
So again, the barriers of entry, sadly, are low, right? So if you have a 2-year degree in education, even if it's from like a different country, Pakistan or whatever else, there are a lot of the centers in the United States, 50% of the centers in the United States are privately owned. And so they could find a center that, they talk to the director and the director knows them and whatever, and they can watch them in the classroom, observe them, and you would have an opportunity to do that. If you're taking coursework on the side, I mean, an associate's degree at a community college is not very many credits at all, right? And you can probably do some of that education online as well. And associates would definitely guarantee that you would have an opportunity to be able to be in the classroom. And the demand is high. The pay, unfortunately, at those low levels is not great. which is why there might be some turnover, which is why there's so many opportunities. But as you become more advanced in the field, I think the opportunities get better, as well as the pay gets better as well.
Yes, thank you. I do have another question here for if you are an ECD teacher, is there any entrance exams or any certifications that you need in order to practice abroad?
Again, I don't know, depending on the country, right? Every country has different legislation. Every country has different requirements. I know that if you work at the school district level, most likely that will be mandated by that country's federal government, right? So like if you're working at the school district, there's a lot of laws and regulations that you want to work at, like, you have to have a particular degree, you have to have a particular credential. But because there's a lot of opportunity in terms of private ownership at the earlier levels, at the earliest ages, like each center kind of runs differently, and each center has different like kind of thresholds or barriers of entry for them. And so if you think that there's a really good center out there that you might want to work with, go talk to them and find out like what would it take for me to be a teacher in your school, and then take it from there.
Okay.
But I think that background, like the associates is really like the base, right? Like you start there and then you build on your knowledge from there.
Right. And with the experiences, you learn so much.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like even me as a parent, like, I mean, I was studying ECD and then I had my own children and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I get it now. Social connections, I get it.
Knowledge is everywhere.
I know.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So I guess it just depends on where you are versus where like you want to be. I guess everywhere has different rules and a set of guidelines.
Yep.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And do you have any advice for parents that are interested in homeschooling? Any tips or tricks or like any rules to help them succeed and get the most out of it?
I'm probably not the expert on this. And I personally myself struggled in trying to homeschool last year during COVID, because I was trying to homeschool them and I was trying to also work myself. So I think one of the main tips if you're trying to homeschool is that it'll be very challenging for a parent to have a full-time job from home while your kids are home. So you might look at some like part-time opportunities professionally, and then you set up a structure, right? Like, I mean, everything structure frees you. You set up a structure and saying, okay, if the kids are in class from like, 7:30 to 9:30, they're doing these activities. So then from 7:30 to 9:30, I can do this kind of a thing. And like my schedule from last year is very much like that. Everybody wakes up at a particular time, everybody finishes breakfast at a particular time. And then, child number one is, in front of Zoom on a remote learning classroom, and doing this while child number two and I are playing together and building this together and doing whatever else. And then child number two plays on his own. And then I have time, like an hour or so, to catch up on my own work. And then, everybody breaks for lunch and everybody has lunch together and you have time to like connect and socialize and build those connections. Everybody goes out then for fresh air and gets like a break from work, from everybody's work, right? Like the kids, their work is play and their work is, like playing with Legos and like building. And then, the younger one would take a nap. The older one would, do some like independent work and independent reading, right? So like, I think it depends on how old your children are, what your schedule looks like, how much flexibility you have in your career. But if you can work out a schedule where, maybe a couple hours of work and a half-hour break and a couple hours of work and a half-hour break would be a decent schedule to work through. So
structure is both beneficial to the children and yourself as
well.
Yes,
structure is very beneficial to children. Like if a child knows what to expect, that actually is really great for their emotional development, right? I think the child ends up becoming much more, like children are resilient in many ways, but if a child knows that, okay, when I wake up, I'm definitely going to get breakfast, then they get a lot less stressed about it, right? The same way that we do, right? Like if we know what to expect for the day, then our day goes so much more smoother. And then, something kind of like shocking happens for us in the day, then you're kind of scrambling, trying to pick up the pieces and trying to figure out how to handle that situation. It could be small, it could be large, but the same with us. And for children, small things for them like feel really large, right? For them, like something really small, like, but you told me we're going to have pizza for lunch and all of a sudden now I have chicken nuggets. Like that's really big for them. So the more those expectations are set earlier, the more that structure is there, and they know like, okay, after I finish my reading, then I get some playtime, then it's a lot easier for them to be able to focus on the reading because they know they're going to get their playtime afterwards, right? But if you say, okay, you're going to read and then I'm not going to give you playtime either, then, you get a lot more pushback and say like, but I want to do this, or I want to play, or I want to do something else, or whatever else, right? But yeah, structure is amazing.
I can definitely attest to that as a college student as well. Like I would sit if my dining hall said pizza, but not chicken.
Yeah, exactly, right? and like those developmental things, like we say, like, yeah, it only works at the, like only young children need this, but no, like all of us, like, and especially those social emotional connections, right? Like all of us need that. All of us need the nutrition. All of us need the fresh air. All of us need the walk. And all of us need that touch and like that connection, right? The human connection.
Yes, definitely. I agree. Thank you. We have a couple more questions here. This is more of a broad question. Do you ever have to face any challenges in your career path? And if so, how did you overcome those challenges?
So it depends, I guess, on the challenge, right? Like, so of course there's going to be challenges as in any career. One of the biggest challenges, like, and it, it's not a challenge, it's just a life circumstance, is in the middle of my doctorate, which is a very long program, I was married, and then I had my first child, and then I had my second child, which then limits how much time I can focus on schooling, right? So that, like, it's a limitation, but then it's also a strength, because I feel like because I had my children at the ages that I had them, at the time that I had them, in the program that I had them, I feel like my work actually became stronger and better, and I'm able to understand it better. I'm not able to, like, before I was married, like I could spend from like 8:30 in the morning to like midnight, literally, in schooling type work, right? Like whether it be like working with colleagues or like working on a presentation, like, doing data analysis, like reading articles, meeting with other colleagues for lunch and dinner, talking about early childhood and the work or whatever else. And now, like, like outside of like a presentation like this on the weekend, like there's not a lot of work that can happen, because I'm like, that's my time to spend with my kids. That's my time to connect with them. That's my time to socialize with them and build their social connections, or the way we refer to it in our house is it's time for me to fill their buckets, so that Monday through Friday, when I know that I might not have the time to fill their buckets as much, they have this kind of like bucket filling happening over the weekend. Right. And then so on the weekend, work is not the priority. Like Monday through Friday, during particular windows, I can work. And so, like, especially after we had the second, like, there's no way I can spend from 8:30 to midnight, like, doing anything that's for me. Like, maybe like 8:30 to 10. And then, they watch a movie for like 2 hours, and then I get some more work done. So it's different. It's different in those ways, challenging in those ways, but it's also very rewarding and different. And I think it makes my work stronger. It makes my ethic better, right? And then like professional challenges, of course, like depending on the professional challenge, right? Like, do I need to get additional course certification? Do I need to be able to do this data analysis differently? Do I need to take a class to understand how to do high order data analysis and research? Like, so then those challenges you address based on the question that you run into, right?
Right. Yes. Thank you. And it all, I guess, goes back to the structure and balance of everything. And
yeah,
I would hope that by filling your children's bucket, you learn as well, because knowledge, again, is everywhere.
yeah. And so like my dissertation is actually around helping parents and how they would work with children, right? So like, what is it that we can do as education professionals to help parents through their work to improve parent-child interactions, to improve parent health? And so it's amazing, like all the stuff that I'm kind of reading about and working through is all the stuff, like if I apply it to me, then I become that parent that I'm reading about, and then I can actually deliver that to my child. And so then I'm like, I can do this better. Having said that, like, we're all tired. And so like in theory, yes, you might have the knowledge, but sometimes it's a little bit harder to actually apply it when, you've been up for 4 hours trying to like figure out why nursing is not working or why this child is not sleeping. And then, and then in those certain circumstances, then, then you do the best that you can.
Thank you. Yeah. With our last question, do you have any advice to give to our audience, whether they have a background in education or not? Just anything that you like them to take away with?
I think early childhood is amazing. So I would love for like so many of the folks that are listening to this, like to be able to have a background in ECD so that we can talk ECD and do really amazing things for young children around the world. And you know, the education is one part of it for sure. Experience is another part. Go work in a center for a little while. You know, have your own children and practice on them. I mean, some of the best education theories actually, like Vygotsky, I can't remember the Swiss guy's name. They like experienced on their children, right? They said they were watching their kids play and seeing like, oh yeah, this is how kids play. And then all these theories got developed. So let's work on some theories together. Let's write children's books together, right? There's like, it's such a great field for people to start into, and then hopefully they get excited about it and want to stay and do different kinds of things because, you know, like not to be sappy, but the children are our future. Like if we do well for them and if we're able to set the foundations right for them, then hopefully we won't need $100 million retrofits in the future. And if we do, we do, right? Like maybe we fix it because that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that healthy human beings grow and develop over time. But it would be great if we could actually set the foundations right at the beginning so that children will be on their own positive developmental trajectories as they get older.
Thank you so much. I think after this presentation, I like realized how like big early childhood education is. Like I only really thought, oh, it's in Jamaat kind of that. No, like
no, it's huge, right?
But with that, we are out of time for questions. Thank you so much again for joining us today, Saima, and thank you all to our attendees for joining us today. Before we conclude our program, I would like to request everyone to complete a brief evaluation to let us know how we can improve our upcoming events. The link is on your screens and we will share the link in the chat box. Please take a moment to complete it now. Once again, thank you all for joining us today. I hope to see you at our next event in 1 week with Farah Ali Bey exploring aerospace engineering. Thank you and Yali Madet.